So as we go through this process, we are now in chapter 9, almost done. And that chapter is where it all comes together. Where healing levels up to the place where it's the shift in narrative, rewriting your story, taking it back from the narcissistic person, and no longer giving them such a central role. As the fog lifts, and as the grief becomes less overwhelming, it's time to start talking about forgiveness, right? And let me tell you, that is one hell of a loaded word in the world of narcissistic relationships. Most people think forgiveness is great. Some people even think it's necessary. They believe it sets us free, that it's noble, that it shows us that we are somehow evolved, that we have released the person who harmed us, that we aren't sidled with the poison of what they did to us. But that, however, that kind of thinking is based on a model of forgiveness that assumes that the person you forgive receives it as a call to action to be better, a place to make amends, to change their ways, and to engage in behaviors that leave you or whomever they harmed feeling safer again. When we forgive and that happens, sign me up. I'm all about forgiveness. None of us are perfect. To be forgiven for our missteps and then to receive that forgiveness as a gift, as a place to become better, to be more mindful, to not keep making the same mistakes, that is how forgiveness is supposed to work. But then there's the world of narcissistic relationships. It's like an upside down world where the fundamental rules of human relationships no longer apply, where everything we were taught kind of goes upside down, where the world defends, or at least enables or excuses, the behavior of the person who continually psychologically and emotionally harms their partner or family member or friend, but who never gets called out themselves. Where no matter how much empathy you show, it is not enough. Where no matter what you do, it's not enough. I mean, let's face it. When we're told, oh, somebody's not forgiving, the picture we hold of a non-forgiving person is of an angry, bitter, resentful, dark-hearted, grudge-holding, inflexible, closed-hearted person, right? To me, actually, that sounds like a vulnerable narcissist. But let's face it. When people who have been profoundly and repeatedly hurt by someone who shows no signs of changing, who keeps doing the same harmful things and justifying them, or tells you that you are too sensitive for reacting to them or gaslights you about them. I don't know how dark-hearted and bitter that is if you choose not to forgive that. The research shows that forgiving serial abusers, people who repeatedly do bad things and don't change even after you forgive them, it's not good for your well-being or your sense of self. It's like survivors of narcissistic relationships need one more damn thing to hurt their sense of self, right? That to keep on forgiving and to have them keep transgressing, it's simply not good for you. I don't think that makes you a dark, cold person to not forgive them. I think it makes you smart. And I'm telling you, I've seen the internet mob, especially the toxic positivity self-development space, cruelly attack people who will own up to the fact that they don't forgive someone. I've seen it happen firsthand. And those attackers never stop to learn the backstory behind that person's lack of forgiveness or unwillingness to forgive. The pressure, both by the larger social mob, by families, by groups of friends, by workplaces, it's strong. And it can be really hard to withstand, especially if you feel as though you are being held back by your own sense of self-doubt, with the narcissistic person's gaslighted assertions that you are the problem, that you are unkind for not forgiving them. This can mean that lots of folks in narcissistic relationships will give in to this forgiveness pressure. And that's absolutely understandable. You give in because you're empathic. To not be rejected out of hand as being mean people who are forgiving, that's why you give in, because you're not a mean person. Because if you don't give in to the forgiveness pressure, then you might actually lose a larger community of people. This can result in what we can only call a sort of non-consensual forgiveness. It's pressured. People forgive so they can keep fitting in. We may also forgive while we are in these relationships because trauma bonding is real. And as much as we have been hurt and recognize that this was not okay, forgiveness may represent a clean slate, a chance for a fresh start, a sort of betrayal blindness meets forgiveness is good, meets trauma bonded, thank goodness I don't have to leave yet, meets the normal human hope for love and attachment. Narcissistic people love forgiveness, right? They love that there's a sort of dry erase board that just gets wiped away, and they just keep getting to do their things, right? It's the ultimate setup for them because they actually feel entitled to that. So when they are forgiven, it fits their schema of the world. They're special. There shouldn't be consequences. Of course they should be forgiven, right? Most people in narcissistic relationships spend a long time forgiving. Years, lifetimes. It's what we were taught to do. We were indoctrinated into it. It's what you were raised on. And each time you do it, and the narcissistic person doesn't change, and we know they're probably not going to change, it can feel you feeling foolish, like you were played, helpless, hopeless, angry, frustrated, let down. People who write this positivity, self-development books about the joys of forgiveness and how it sets you free, I don't believe that they've been in a relationship with a narcissistic person who keeps breaking their heart again and again, and least of all a narcissistic person that they can't easily get away from. There are Instagram accounts and all sorts of programs focused on forgiveness. I got to tell you, it's a good brand. And it becomes a space where so many survivors of narcissistic relationships feel shamed. Either you keep doing it repeatedly and you get burned, or you don't do it and you get shamed for being cold and unforgiving. You might get called unempathic. You might even get called narcissistic. I have witnessed people who have said, I can't forgive them anymore. They have done too much harm. And then the family system around them would say something like, well, now look at you, who's unempathic now? Ain't that the pot calling, and you know all the rest of it, right? But let's face it, we are so focused on this conversation about forgiving the narcissistic person that we put that ahead of forgiving ourselves. And you may wonder, what exactly is it that we need to forgive ourselves for? Well, most of you who are survivors, you blame yourselves for not being enough, for being too extra, for asking too much, for being disloyal, for being mean, for choosing the narcissist, for being angry at parents and family members who invalidated you. You have to forgive yourselves, because to feel angry, hurt, betrayed, and then wanting to see these folks clearly and understand it, that's your salvation. If you are hell-bent on forgiving them, you do that, but you got to forgive yourself first. You do that, then we can talk about forgiveness. In the book, I call all of this, that entire section of this book is called The Treachery of Forgiveness. And let me tell you, it's a treacherous space in these relationships, whether you choose to forgive or not, or choose not to know, and perhaps down the road, whatever you choose, it's your call. But if when you finally, whatever you decide around forgiveness, I don't care if you do or you don't, but it's got to be from a place that feels authentic and whole to you. If you forgive and then stop forgiving, or if you don't forgive and then you do forgive, or if you never do, all of those options are great. You do what feels authentic for you. Just don't fake it. And just as an FYI, don't feel the need to tell them or anyone else that you don't forgive the narcissist. This is an experience you can hold internally. And whether you do or you don't, always remember that you can heal. Forgiveness is optional. So there's a lot more about forgiveness, and order it, read it, and tell yourself off the hook if you don't feel like forgiving the narcissist. You may get there someday, and even if you don't, you'll be fine. Thanks again.